Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the second half of the episode with Larry. I hope you're really enjoying the conversation. Before we get into the second half of it, I'm going to take a second to talk to our listeners who are new to this episode about the Block Reward podcast and what I'm trying to do with the show. I think that people who understand Bitcoin have a responsibility to help other people understand Bitcoin. And the need or the urgency for as many people as possible to understand this idea is accelerating. The money's fucked. And the idea that something else could be the money is only crazy until you understand Bitcoin. So if you understand Bitcoin, now is the time to take action. And this is me taking action in my own way. And I think there's a lot of people taking action. And it doesn't mean starting a podcast, but it just, for me, it did. So because I had this idea. And the idea is that I want to have the Bitcoin people that orange pilled me having sort of kindergarten Bitcoin conversations that new Bitcoiners and non-Bitcoiners can listen to. And so that they have the benefit of hearing the most enthusiastic and followed people in the space without having to have logged 500 or 1,000 hours of Bitcoin study before they might be entertaining and insightful. So if you listen to some of the other episodes and what we've recorded, that's kind of the flow of what we're doing here. I think the first ones, they're getting better all the time. And we have the January episodes recorded already, and those ones are even better than these. So if you are enjoying it, I'm making this show as much as for Bitcoiners as for the people that Bitcoiners might want to send their shows to. So if you're enjoying it or if you're looking for a show like that, check it out. And if it isn't that, give me some feedback because I want this thing to be as good as possible. There's going to be a lot of people who need good entry-level information about Bitcoin over the next year and beyond. Thanks again for tuning in and hope to see you back soon.
Keeps understanding the problems that we're facing with monetary debasement and wakes up and says, I should take some of that money I have in bonds and stocks and buy some of this sound money shit, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be the whole 400 trillion. Let's say 10% of it comes in. That's $40 trillion. That's nuts. 40 trillion chasing 5. I mean, so it's not 10%, 5, call it 1% is 4 trillion chasing 5. I mean, the point is that if I'm correct about the monetary debasement, which I think I am, and if the awareness of that grows and spreads, there's a lot of money that's in these other things that will come trying to buy our things, which would then suggest that the price of our things is going to go up a lot. That's the argument.
You made a great point about innovation, and I think it's a really helpful way to think about it, that sometimes when an innovation is in itself sort of a quantum leap forward, it's normal that it could be so different from what preceded it that it's hard for a lot of people to understand exactly what it does or why it's valuable. And I kind of think that's part of the source of the confusion with Bitcoin.
For sure. I mean, I was an early investor in the internet, and I recall people saying, well, why do you really need that? What is that? It's bullshit. It's all, and there was a lot, you weren't, well, you were, but, the whole dot-com bubble in 2000, I mean, you should have seen the craziness. I mean, we didn't have a Sam Bankman-Fried, but we had a lot of people like that. We had a lot of crazy shit, crazy claims, eyeballs, value. It's going to take over the world. You can't have too much bandwidth. I mean, it was all the same nutty shit. And yet, those of us who were in it could see, yeah, okay, there's a lot of noise and hype and bullshit here, but underneath it all, this internet thing actually does a very valuable thing. It allows you to, send email and get information, worldwide. I mean, it's why you and I are able to sit here. You're in Australia and I'm in Boston and we can have a conversation. I mean, it's amazing, right? And I couldn't foresee any of this when I was investing in the internet in 1993. But I knew that it did things that were working, and there was every year more dogs were eating the food, which is a phrase I like to use when you're looking at venture capital opportunities. I mean, it's just, is it growing? I mean, people say to me, "What are your concerns about Bitcoin?" It's very smart to ask that. There are two concerns I have. One would be if it were a technical problem, and when I started out in it, that was my great concern. That you can't have money based on a computer because computers crash, right? I mean, I've been around in computers since the 70s or early 80s, and the IBM blue screen. I mean, computers crash. You reboot them, you set them up, you start all over again. You hope you didn't lose your files, right? How could you have money on something that works like that? It's just not going to work, right? So that was my initial skepticism, and it took me a long time to get through that. And that's a whole story unto itself. I'm not going to go into it here, but I got comfortable with that. And now we've got 800,000 blocks in 15 years. I'm pretty sure it's not going to crash. I mean, it's not a zero probability, but I think it's a very low probability it's going to crash. I think the other thing that would concern me, or that I've always watched with Bitcoin is our dogs eating the food, is user adoption increasing. Okay. In other words, suddenly people just said, you know what? That thing's boring. I don't need it. I'm not going who gives a shit? it's a flash in the pan. Well, then I'd say, well, okay, if people aren't adopting it, people don't see benefits to using it, if there aren't use cases where people are using it, more people using it every year, then I would say, well, okay, maybe we got a problem here. Maybe this isn't as great as I thought it is. But as you know, as I know, if you look at all the statistics surrounding the network, it's growing and usage is growing and the use cases are growing and the things you can do with it are growing. And you've got all these fabulous stories of how people in third world countries that used to get robbed by the money changers can now send Bitcoin back and forth and, capture all their value without getting screwed. I mean, there are a lot of, and that's just one use case. I mean, there are hundreds of them and they're growing all the time. So, as long as the technology holds together, it has so far, 15 years. And as long as the use cases are growing, this just doesn't strike me as that hard to get behind. Do you know what I mean? How's it going to evolve exactly? I don't know. I mean, I couldn't, like I said, when I was back in the internet in the early days, I had no idea. Did I think I'd be talking to people around the world on a video feed? I started off putting a phone in a modem and listening to beep, beep, beep. I don't know if you were around at that in those days, but in the early days of the internet, I had a 2400 baud modem. It drove me nuts. Broadband got developed and, blah, blah, blah. So, and this will too. I mean, there are parts about Bitcoin that are kind of clunky and kind of annoying. I mean, Coinbase reminds me of AOL. It's a piece of shit. They're a terrible broker. Their service is awful. The whole company sucks, just the way AOL sucked. But AOL brought a lot of people into the internet space, and then better companies emerged. And Coinbase has done the same thing with Bitcoin. So, it's to me, it's inevitable. And I would just, what I say to people who I'm talking to, I'm an investment advisor, so I'm legally trained and all sorts to help people. And I just say, you just don't want to have zero of this. You don't have to take your whole net worth and put it in it. As a risk manager, you're supposed to take, risk adjusted bets. And so, you don't want to miss it because you've heard about it. If you've heard about it and you're intrigued by it and you study it and you realize that it could go up between 10, 100 or 1,000 times its present value, then having zero would be really disappointing in 10 or 15 years if that happened and you were told about it and you never listened. Whereas if you went out and you put just a little bit in it and that happened, you'd be like, oh, I'm glad I did that. And then, of course, once you start putting a little bit, you probably learn more and you think, you know what, I want to have more in it. And then, of course, you get crazy like you and me. And, right now, just so people know, I have about half of the capital that I'm trying to grow in value. Apart from my deep savings and my real estate house that I own, I'd have it about half in gold and gold miners and silver miners and about half in Bitcoin. Because I think those two things I've got a nice double-edged approach to protecting myself from monetary debasement. And people say, well, why do you, people shit on me. They say, well, you have a gold, it's a boomer bug, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, but hang on a second. Gold doesn't go down 80% on a regular basis. The thing that everyone is trying to orange pill somebody on Bitcoin has to do, if you're being honest with the people you're trying to orange pill, is you've got to prepare them for the volatility. Because those of us who've been here since 2013, we know that, it can be very exciting when it goes up 5x, but it can also correct and come back down. And so, dollar cost averaging and having a long-term perspective is an important part of the whole process, right?
You mentioned, I want to come back to this idea. We've never seen an experiment like this before. One of the use cases I think doesn't get enough attention is just hodling it. And I think outsiders may not understand that there are a lot of people within Bitcoin who actually have no intention of ever turning their Bitcoin back into dollars at any price. And one of them is Michael Saylor, who holds a humongous amount of Bitcoin. And Saylor has said, we're not selling at any price. So what do you think that means as far as...
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And they could give it to their heirs or, it is what it is. It's a form of savings. It's like owning Manhattan real estate or something. I doubt that anyone who owns a significant amount of it today will live out their entire life without selling it. Perhaps they will give it to their kids or something. I know in my particular case, if it gets kind of silly valuable, and I have other needs, just as, whatever my savings would be, if I sell 1% or 2% or 5% or whatever it is I need to fulfill some other need, I'll say, you know what, I'd rather I have this thing over here than have that piece of savings over there. And I'll just sell it. And that's how it will get more widely distributed. I think that will naturally happen. That will naturally occur. People say, well, there's not enough to go around. Well, there's always enough to go around at a high enough price.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you one last question, Larry. We're both huge fans of the fourth turning. And, I think, as part of this, it's navigating times that are going to look a lot different than what we're used to. in terms of planning for your sort of financial security and understanding what options are out there. And where do you think this is going? The world, money, in the context of fourth turning and it's an open-ended question.
If people want to read the dark interpretation of where it's going, pick up a book called The Mandibles, by Lionel Shriver, and it describes a currency collapse in the West in this time frame, and that gives you kind of a dark view of where it could go. Look, I'm an optimist, and I'm positive, and I believe very much in humanity and the human condition, and I actually think that some of this transition we're going through is almost kind of spiritually driven. I mean, we needed to blow up this corrupt monetary system to get back to a system that'll be better for our kids and grandkids. Dialing it down more granularly, I think we could have. I'm not sure we'll have a full-blown hyperinflation in the United States or outright currency failure. I hope we don't. I think we might have very, very high inflation and then some kind of a monetary reset, similar to what President Roosevelt did in the 30s. I hope that and I believe that we will ultimately return to a sound money standard, because I think that, as unfortunately many people don't understand it today, but when we get really super high inflation here, people are going to scream and people are going to say, this is ridiculous. And they're going to know what caused it. And they're going to want to go back to first principles. And first principles are sound money. And so I kind of think that, if you look at how these fourth turnings tend to roll out, Scott, they're kind of 20 to 30 years long. Let's say this one started in 2028. So I kind of believe in the next 10, maybe 15 years at the outside, mankind will have decided and demand that we are on a sound money standard that might initially be kind of gold driven just because of the history of gold and the central banks have gold and they might try that first. But ultimately, I think it'll be Bitcoin driven, but it could be both in parallel. Whatever it is, it will not be, the fiat nation state, military industrial complex bullshit that we all live with right now. And it'll be a much better and more peaceful world as a result of that. Because to me, the 20th century was all about peak centralization. I mean, Henry Ford invented the, assembly line, and we figured out we could make a lot of shit really cheap, and that improved everybody's living standard, but it can create, a lot of centralization, right? You had to have all the parts made in different places, bring them together, et cetera. Well, and then World War II, we figured out, hey, you know what? We can kill a lot of people really efficiently too. We get these big tanks and planes and bombers, and damn, if we didn't manage to kill, 20, 30, 40 million people in a 6-year time period. And then, of course, we invented the ultimate killing machine, the nuclear bomb. And I think humanity kind of reached its centralized, its maximum centralization. And then, the higher spirit of the power is that I'm spiritual. The things I like to think happen is that technology saved us. And technology and the microchip came along, and it led to the internet. It led to all the things we're seeing now. And what we're realizing is that they're diseconomies to scale. They're economies to scale because you can make cards faster on an assembly line. They're diseconomies to scale because you get this huge scale, and then you get some madman at the top of it like Hitler, and he figures out how to kill a bunch of people really quickly because he uses the scale for the killing. And so I think we're going to a world that will be decentralized, and the internet is a decentralizing force. And these corrupt, centralized things like the Western media and Western press are getting disintermediated. I mean, the New York Times used to control the narrative. Now Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson outdraw the New York Times. There used to be no way to get your message out. Now you got the internet. Anyone can get their message out. Doesn't mean you're going to get listened to, but if you got a message, you can get it out there. The money, Bitcoin is just a decentralized form of money. You used to have a centralized system based on a central bank, based on the Bank of England, which, and you had to have a way so that the monetary system wouldn't fail by, providing a backstop. Well, there is no backstop on Bitcoin, but you don't need one because it's a standalone system. And so, I see us evolving into a world that's just a much, much better world. But, and again, not to be a doomer, but to just recognize that as a meteorologist, I can see a hurricane on the horizon. I think there will be some troubling years, and particularly probably more troubling if you hold government bonds than if you hold gold or Bitcoin. Because the transition here, the people who are running the system are going to do everything they can to keep it going in their favor. And yet, the tools we have and the advantages of what we see are so manifest that they are sure we've got the winning hand. They are sure to fail, and we are sure to win. But it will be a football match. There will be some back and forth, right? Look, nobody likes or wants to see human misery. But on the other hand, to some degree, without some human misery, human misery is also what oftentimes leads to a demand for change and a demand for reform. Do you know what I mean? I think the shortcomings of the current system that we live in are pretty obvious to most intelligent people in the world today. You poll people about how much they trust the government, how much they trust the media, how much they trust the system. I mean, it's pretty abysmal. And it's kind of like, we can do a lot better. And guess what? This parallel thing is getting built and it's going to be a lot better. So that's something to be really happy and optimistic about. But, in the meantime, that doesn't mean you shouldn't, put up your storm shutters because a hurricane might be coming.
Yeah, it's this funny thing where there's a certain level of, like you said, it can come off as doomer, but I really just think that people need to understand the severity of our current reality, so that they can, properly plan for moving forward.
Well, and that's and by the way, that's what fourth turnings are all about. They're all about, it's, the 30s led to World War II, the 1860s led to the Civil War, the American Revolution was a fourth turning, right? A bunch of, and it's interesting too. It always starts with a small group of people. Everyone thinks, a lot of people haven't studied the history very carefully. Everyone thinks, all of America rose up and said, we're going to smite Britain. Those guys, they piss us off. We're going to say, no. The average American, the guy living out in Pennsylvania, running his farm, or my relatives in Michigan, they probably couldn't give a shit about Britain. They were just trying to, run their farm and stay alive. But if you were in Boston and they were putting soldiers in your house and, conscripting you and, making you pay taxes, hell, you got pissed off. And you're like, fuck this. I don't care if they got the most powerful Navy. I don't care if a big empire. Fuck them. They can't rule us. And that's kind of what's going on here. The system is broken. Some people are, asleep to it, but there's some of us who are awake about it and are pissed off by it. Have been abused by these central banks for the last 100 years and are like, no, this is wrong. We're not going to take this shit. And, your system is broken. We're going to collapse it. And that's kind of how I see it. And that's what's going on.
You're just a really valuable voice for the Bitcoin community. And I so appreciate your,
You're kind to say that. I laugh at myself because I'm like, my wife says, I'm old man yells at central bank. You know what I mean? And I am, I'm a boomer. I'm 66 and, I've got all my faults and I'm far from perfect. But, I'm in this because I've got kids and hopefully someday I'll have grandkids and, everyone leaves a legacy. And this monetary stuff, something I've been studying my whole career. I understand it very well. And so I feel like, it's kind of my duty to step forward and just try and help other people to see it and understand it because if, the faster we spread the word, the faster we'll get to the other side and the other side will be better than where we are right now. So that's kind of the thought process.
Couldn't agree more. For our listeners that want to find more of you online, where should they look?
Yeah, so I'm a loudmouth on Twitter. You just go to Twitter and type in my name, Lawrence Lepard. You'll see me there. Every day I take a shot at another investment banker. And then I have a website and I write a quarterly letter talking about all these things, which is free. You can sign up for it. We won't spam you. And the address for that, it's Equity Management Associates is the name of the company. I run the investment company. The ticker symbol, the www is EMA, Edward Mark Alpha, then the number, numeric character 2.com. So you can find all that and that's all free. And then shameless plug, I do run 2 funds and we do take new investors because of all the SEC rules. You have to have kind of 100,000 plus, but the one fund is the Sound Money Fund, which is gold, silver, and a little bit of Bitcoin. And the other is the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. And if anyone is a accredited investor and has interest in those, you can reach out. We do have slots left and we don't always have slots in those, but we do right now. And in fact, on the gold side, a lot of people have given up on gold. So we had a bunch of slots open up. So
we'll be sure to add those links as well in the bios.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's not really what this is all about. We don't need any new investors, but if people are interested.
Thank you again, Lawrence. Love to have you back on some time to chat again.
God, happy to do it. I really enjoyed meeting you. And as you know, we talked a couple of times. So anytime you want to get me on, just reach out and I'll try and do it.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Block Reward. We're trying to do something different here, creating accessible conversations meant for people who aren't obsessed with Bitcoin. If you found this episode informative and engaging, hit that subscribe button to make sure you stay updated with future episodes. Your feedback matters. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your reviews and help us with our goal of creating Bitcoin content that is simple and easy to understand. Bitcoin has an important role to play in the future of finance. It will change the way we save, spend, and invest. Discover why Bitcoin offers a game-changing opportunity for forward-thinking employers by visiting blockrewards.ca. Block Rewards' mission is helping Canadian employers implement strategies for integrating Bitcoin into compensation and benefits, supercharge your recruitment and retention strategies, and help your team members plan for the rising cost of living by rewarding their work with the hardest money ever invented. Special thanks to our top sponsor, Paramount Employee Benefits Consulting, Canada's only Bitcoin forward benefits and pension advisory. For more information, find them at paramountbenefits.ca. Big shout out to Podigy, our production team that makes all this possible, and BMX Escape for producing our music. Bitcoin is an expansive and dense topic many people walk away from early. To Bitcoin enthusiasts looking for that podcast they can share with friends, family, and colleagues, one they'll actually listen to, we hope that is us. The content of these conversations is meant to be provided for information purposes only. Nothing here is investment advice. Bitcoin is a big topic. Be sure to do your own research before making any personal financial decisions. Thanks for listening.